All right, Alexander, what is going on in Ukraine? What is the latest? I'll tell you what I think are the three big news topics. Russia continues to move on Bakhmut. Actually, I've heard it's now surrounded. Um, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I've got a lot of reports saying that all of Bakhmut is surrounded, so I imagine it's going to go the way of Mariupol, just a surrounding strangulation type of operation, I imagine. The other big story was that came in this morning was that the Ukraine military using HIMARS, they hit the regional administration building in Kherson, which is kind of like a square, just your average European square with the administration there. I believe two officials actually died. Two officials in Kherson died from that strike. And there were a lot of civilians around as well. So this is obviously a civilian target. And the Ukraine, or there was some bomb. I don't know if it was a missile strike or if it was a sabotage, but there was a bomb that went off in Lugansk, a Lugansk official building as well. And there you do have the confirmed death of the prosecutor general and his deputy prosecutor as well. And I'm trying to think if there was another really big development or story. I think those were the big things that happened today.
Yeah.
With regards
to I think
on the ground.
I think you're absolutely. I think again you summed them up very well. Can I just say quickly? I think the big news, the really big news, is in terms of the actual battlefields, is what's happening in Bakhmut. And be clear about this. We've discussed this in many programs. We don't need to go over this in detail. If Bakhmut falls, and it's a city of 70,000+ it itself, or was before the war, but it's part of a large conurbation, a cluster of other important townlets and villages, which together make a significant urban conurbation and a major industrial zone. It's a big loss economically and politically for Ukraine, and apparently also this city was the linchpin of Ukrainian defenses in Donbass. So it's a big event, a very big military event if it happens, which it's looking increasingly likely that it will. Now, the other thing at the moment, and I hasten to say at the moment, is it looks as if all the other attempts by Ukraine to launch offensives in all kinds of places, what Brian Beletic said in a live stream that we did, banging on all the sort of positions, Russian positions, to see if there's any weakness. None of that up to now has produced any outcomes. In fact, in Kherson region, things are looking particularly grim for Ukraine at the moment. So they are returning to their previous practice, which is that they're going for targets behind the front lines, looking to assassinate people. I mean, that's what this amounts to.
They also hit Belgorod as well.
Belgorod, that's right, the city, which is exactly. So they're looking to do this. Now, at one level, it's clearly intended to frighten people, to prevent them in the, what the Russians call the liberated territories from cooperating with the Russians. And of course, bear in mind, a lot of people in these places will be alarmed anyway by the Russian pullout from Kharkiv. So you hit them now, you make them even more concerned. You tell them, if you cooperate with the Russians, you're signing your own death sentence. So that's part of this, or it's a big part of this. But it's also, or so it seems to me, again, a reflection of Ukraine having been fought to a standstill in terms of its various offensives and now trying to do something to retain the appearance that it's actually still in the battle and that it's still in motion. This is a problem for the Russians. The fact that, people are dying who work with them in Lugansk, in Kherson region and the rest, it shows that the Russians haven't sorted out the internal security in these places. And that's an alarming fact for anybody who takes the Russian side in this conflict. And again, one has to say this, it shows a deficiency in that area where the Russians historically have been most strong, which is in sorting out internal security.
Well, doesn't Russia now have to somehow respond to this? I mean, they don't have to, but aren't the people in Kherson, aren't they going to expect some sort of retaliation in kind? Because you have to, if you're Russia, I would imagine, you have to show the people that you're going to be governing soon, that you can protect them, and that if something were to happen, like what happened in Kherson or Lugansk, that as a government, you're able to take action when stuff like this happens. I mean, I'm just trying to think. Once again, Russia could not do anything for now. They could play it cool and not retaliate. But if you're a citizen, if you're a resident of Kherson and you have a Russian passport now, and you're about to enter the Russian Federation, and this happens in the main square, I'm just trying to think. As a citizen, you would probably say, "Well, is this country that I'm about to ascend into, are they going to protect their citizens?" I mean, I would imagine it's kind of like the psychology.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's playing out.
Absolutely.
Or perhaps I'm wrong.
It's the question that the Ukrainians are posing, and they're deliberately doing it. Now, that feeds into the other bigger question: will Russia upgrade its operation into a counter-terrorist operation? Because they could argue that these assassinations are consistent with terrorist activity. Other countries have done this. Israel has done it. The United States has done it. And on that basis, they could then start launching attacks on Ukrainian leaders. And I don't even really mean Zelensky, but, the various operatives of right sector, what's left of the Azov regiment, IDA, all of these people within the internal security services, SBU, and things like that. They could start striking at them. Now, maybe that's what they will do. And, one interesting thing is, they apparently actually are buying drones from Iran. Maybe that's one of the things they're going to use them for. Possible. I mean, I'm speculating now, but what I'm saying is it's a question of political will. And up to now, the Russians have avoided going down this road. But after these events, they may feel obliged to. The pressure certainly is
NATO,
there.
I imagine. Yeah. NATO and the collective West, I imagine, they want Russia to take it a step further and to declare war. I mean,
Yes,
that's the way I'm looking at it. I think in much the same way that the United States and NATO and the collective West goaded Russia into this special military operation, that's what they wanted. They wanted Russia to act on Ukraine. Everything, all the actions that they did was leading up to goading Russia into this conflict. I imagine now they want Russia to not declare an anti-terrorist operation, but to go all the way to a full declaration of war, because to be quite honest, that's the only way that the collective West could possibly sink the Russian economy or pull Russia off trajectory. If Russia goes full on mobilization war. But Russia's going to probably, if they do escalate, they'll probably play it much more reserved.
I think that's absolutely. By the way, you've done a very good program, if I may say, which people should watch on Alex's own channel on this very topic. Just to quickly add that. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that partly this is intended to goad the Russians into precisely those reactions. I mean, after the Kharkov offensive, there was a vast number of people all over the place in Russia saying, we must mobilize, we must most partially mobilize or fully mobilize or do all sorts of dramatic things. And for the moment, the Russians have, the Russian leadership has held firm. I think they know perfectly well that this is a trap that is being laid for them, and they're not going to go there. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to react at all. They can act proportionately to this, and eventually, I think they will.
How does mobilization affect the Russian economy?
Well, it
in
takes
a negative way.
Right.
Why would mobilization afford the collective West a way to derail the progress that the Russian economy has made in beating back the sanctions war over the past 6 months.
Okay, if you're going to start mobilizing reserves and people, and by the way, I mean, the United States, when it sends its expeditionary forces around the world, it calls up people to join the National Guard, and the National Guard can then be deployed overseas, and we saw that happen in many cases. So, this isn't completely unusual. It depends what kind of mobilization you mean. If you mean full mobilization, pulling everybody that you want into the Russian army, you're taking people out of the
full declaration of war.
Full declaration of war. You're taking people out of the civilian economy. You are obviously that's going to affect production. You have to then bring the civilian economy. You have to mobilize that also in order to keep the factories running. You are completely changing the whole character and nature of the economy. And that inevitably is going to affect living standards in Russia, which the government has been wanting to preserve and, in fact, enhance. The central bank has just cut interest rates again, which shows you the direction that the Russians want to take. If you go for full mobilization, then of course you will be in that kind of scenario. You could of course go for partial mobilization, calling in reservists, but even that is not cost-free. It is not problem-free. It seems to me that the Russians don't need to do any of these things. As we've discussed several times on these programs, there are more than enough standing units in the Russian army, many more than enough to handle this operation in Ukraine. They can simply deploy more units that are already there to the battle lines. They can also bring in, more of these volunteer forces, from Chechnya and wherever. They don't need to go for any kind of mobilization. They don't need to go for any kind of, war declarations. They don't need to do those things. What they can do is two things. One is that they can deploy more forces. Secondly, if they make it a counter-terrorist operation, they drop away some of these legal constraints that they have imposed on themselves, and they can start to do some of the things that you said, which is go after the kind of people who undoubtedly they know are behind these particular attacks on, people in Kherson, in Lugansk, and wherever. So if they do those if they take that step, they're not going all the way to what the West wants them to do, but they are playing with a stronger hand.
Okay, the United States, the Biden White House, he was giving a speech a couple of days ago, and he was taking a victory lap for the Inflation Reduction Act, while at the same moment in time we got the inflation report, the numbers, and things were really, really bad. The markets crashed, and I'm sure everyone knows what happened last week with the inflation numbers. In Germany, we've been talking about it almost every other day, and in the EU, we've been talking about it every other day. The energy crisis, the deindustrialization of Germany and of the EU, and the fact that just about every country in the European Union is going to be heading towards some sort of very deep recession / depression. In the UK, you've also talked about the UK economy and how it's collapsing as well. Does a declaration of war on the part of Russia, does it in any way help collective West economies, the US economy or the EU economies? Is there a benefit to them with regards to having an all-out war in Ukraine? I'm reading a lot of articles and reports about ramping up weapons productions, more contracts for the military-industrial complex. Stoltenberg said that the EU has got to really sign a lot of contracts with MIC companies to replenish their stockpiles, and I'm just trying to think to myself. I understand the benefit from the damage of the Russian economy if the collective West can goad them into escalating to a very high degree. But I'm wondering, does the collective West benefit in some way from a full-on escalation in Ukraine, because things are very, very bad for just about every country in the collective West at this moment in time. I mean, I can't pick a country where things are stable.
Absolutely. And can I just say, before we touch on this very important issue, that, when there was the previous inflation report, which showed a slight dip, all kinds of people were saying, this is proof that inflation has peaked in the US. One place you didn't hear anybody saying that was on this channel. We did programs about this. We said this is absolutely common. When inflation is rising, it doesn't rise in a vertical line. It goes up. You sometimes have dips, but overall the trend is for it to go higher. And it will go higher still in the autumn when oil prices start rising again, which they will. Now, put that aside. Does a Russian declaration of war help the West economically? Would it enable the West to try to overcome its problems by cranking up arms production? The short answer is it wouldn't. In fact, going down that particular route, cranking up arms production at a time when energy, commodities, food are in short supply is going to compound problems. It's going to make things worse because you are diverting even more of your production away from civilian needs towards military needs, which can't really be, fulfilled. It will probably accelerate inflation. And of course, you could try and deal with that by imposing more price controls, going in for more centralized control over your economy. You can do all those sort of things. But then, of course, you run into the fact that the MIC itself probably wouldn't be happy with being supervised in that sort of way. And of course, the European electorates and the US electorate might balk at that. So I don't think it works for them economically, but it does help them politically. And that's an extremely important thing to understand. Now, look at some recent events that we've seen. There was a very weird report in Reuters, which is completely untrue. I mean, I can definitely say it's untrue, that Dmitry Kozak, who was a Russian diplomat, apparently came to Putin back in February and said that he's got a deal with someone, it's not clear whom, to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And Putin said, go ahead, this isn't good enough, we want territory in Ukraine, and that's why he went to war. That is a completely false story. I remember all the diplomacy. Kozak's job was not to negotiate about Ukraine's NATO membership. His job was to try to get the Minsk agreements activated. It's a false story being distributed by the British. Its intention is to make it look as if the Russians are intransigent, that they're not prepared to negotiate, that they're inflexible, that they want to pursue this thing to a ultimate conclusion, that they are in effect waging a war of aggression. Notice the word war. And of course, you also now have people like Ursula von der Leyen coming along. She's made more speeches about saying the policy cannot change. We will continue as we're doing. We're going to press on till victory. Again, very warlike language. And we've also had a peace proposal from Ukraine, which is so extreme that the Russians are almost, they're bound to reject it. What I think the idea is you get a Russian declaration of war that stills any debate in the West about looking for a diplomatic compromise. Because you will say, well, the Russians have declared war, they're pursuing a war, they're engaging in complete mobilization. So given that their objective is victory, straightforward, unalloyed victory, what is there for us to talk to the Russians about? So even if things get really bad in the West, we have no choice but to continue with these policies. And if you think of it in that sense, then you can see exactly why a declaration of war by Russia against Ukraine would play directly into Western hands at this particular time. It would solidify the position of the hardliners, of the Ursula von der Leyens, the Josep Borrells, the Annalena Baerbocks, the Robert Habecks, and people of that kind. Robert Habeck, by the way, has just seized more Russian assets. He's just seized Rosneft's oil refineries in Germany. So they want a Russian declaration of war because that entrenches them. It makes their position politically stronger because they're saying we're not opposing a country that is, amenable to reason, amenable to negotiation. We are dealing with a country that is declaring war, a war of aggression against its neighbors.
Yeah, I think you have three things at play. And I think the collective West is saying, you know what, if we get two of those three, then we're very, very happy. They're looking to get the political win. In other words, let's get Russia to escalate so that we go to our people, our citizens, and say, look, you see, we told you guys. We told you that Russia's going to go all out in this conflict, so we have to go all out. You're going to suffer, citizens, but there's really no choice in the matter, and it solidifies their political position. I think you have the centralization of power, which is something that they're doing, as witnessed in Habeck's recent act, where he actually just confiscates. He steals.
Yeah,
robbery.
absolutely.
He's stealing Russian property.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no other way. Not even a private company, Rosneft. Rosneft's government owned as well, or something, right?
Yeah. It's partly government owned, but it does have private.
It's partly
shareholders.
government. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you seize a company's assets, just flat out thievery. So there's the centralization, which is something that they definitely want. I mean, we know all the governments in the collective West want to centralize their power. So they get the political win, they get the centralization of power win, but they lose the economy. In other words, the economies of all collective West nations, it sinks. But that's for the people, not for the elite. The elite will be fine, but the people, they're gonna become poor overnight. But that's okay, they say. This is what the elites are saying. They say, you know what? We can deal with our population. We can deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If they get on the streets, we'll lock them up. We'll censor them. We'll do whatever. We can deal with that. But if we can get the centralization and the political cover, that's a win.
Absolutely, of course it is. It's exactly what they want because that's exactly what the whole direction of European and indeed globalist policies has been for years now. I mean, it's always pushed towards centralization and greater control. And if the Russians declare war, that fits directly into that narrative. It makes it much easier to construct a narrative which would enable you, in effect, to, as I said, quelch any talk of negotiations and centralize control even further. Because you say, you're up against a country that has declared war against another European state.
So Germany is going to also bail out Uniper. I think they're going to.
Yeah.
I'm hearing talks they're just going to nationalize it. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just going to take it over.
Yeah.
So you have they've confiscated these Rosneft facilities. They're going to be taking over the energy companies. I mean, Germany is well on the path to just becoming an authoritarian state. At this moment in
Absolutely,
time.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. But note
they're there.
Yeah, no, but note though that they're going to continue apparently to close their nuclear power plants at the end of December. That apparently they're not going to change. So I agree. I mean, they're doing things which in other times, other German leaders of the post-war period would have been absolutely horrified about. But that is exactly where they're going, and they're going at an ever-accelerating pace. Now, I am getting people from Germany who are telling me that more and more Germans are becoming increasingly concerned about this. They're becoming alarmed about the way their living standards are falling, the way Germany is changing, the whole militarization, this attempted militarization, this increasingly authoritarian power that we see. Bear in mind that in the last parliamentary elections, the Green Party, which is the party that's running and driving this whole thing, only got 15% of the vote. It upticked as a result of the war, but that's flatlined and apparently it's now falling. So this is not a popular policy in Germany, but it is the one they're following. And what will they do if they come under pressure? Well, we've already seen what they're going to do. They're going to intensify repression even further. They're going to say anybody who stands out, speaks out, disputes this policy is a Russian agent, is a Putinist, and in light of that, they must be silenced.
Militarization, nationalizing the means of production, centralization, and fighting Russia and at war with Russia. It seems like we've been here before. I don't know.
A lot of Germans I know are saying that. By the way, the Russian ambassador to Germany gave an interview to the Russian newspaper Izvestia, in which he basically made that very same point.
Any final thoughts?
Well, if
This is crazy stuff.
If you're a German, ask yourself this question: when you tried that before, how did it turn out? Not very well for Germany. Mm-hmm. I have to say, and I will finish it with this: I am astonished that Germany has gone down this road. I know Germans. I've known many German people throughout my life. The one thing they all seem to be agreed about is that Germany would never end up doing this sort of thing all over again. And here they are, they rushed into it at, almost incredible speed, unbelievable velocity, without even really thinking about it, certainly not thinking it through. And the enthusiasm of some people for it is astonishing to me, but also the lack of pushback from the powerful German institutions or German institutions that I had thought were powerful to this is remarkable as well.
Well, it's essentially three people that are driving Germany towards this disaster. It's Ursula, who's German.
Yeah.
She was defense minister at one point, the failed defense minister. It's Ursula. It's Habeck. And it's Baerbock. Three people.
I completely agree. Yeah.
And they've taken Germany off the cliff.
Absolutely, yes. With the foot on the accelerator at ever faster speed.
And Schultz, because he's a weakling, doesn't do anything.
Well, he does absolutely. I gather that there is now increasing pushback against him within the SPD. But he's clearly intimidated by Habeck and the others and continues to go along with what they want.
Where's the CDU in all of this?
Where is the CDU in all of this? Again, Friedrich Merz, many people had expected that he would be a voice of sanity and reason. He's not. He's been trying to make political capital by saying that he'd take a tougher line than Scholz. In other words, he's trying to outplay Scholz. He does it without apparently very much conviction. And I gather there's an awful lot of people in the CDU who are very queasy about this. But he's not provided the pushback that many expected, or might have expected, than I once expected that he might do.
Right. The AfD?
The AfD is there,
not significant.
but again, it's not really broken through here. So it may become a force, but there are. If you want to see criticism of this in Germany, it is coming from the AfD, which, by the way, bear in mind, is the party that everybody in Germany points at, or at least the establishment points at, and so that they're the party that's unreconstructed. Hard right, militarist, all the F word and the N word and all those things are hurled at them by the very people, as we said, who are actually driving Germany into this across the abyss in this way. But the AfD is a deeply divided party. It's not really very well organised. It's got far too many strong personalities and weak personalities and odd personalities, and it's never really crystallised into an effective opposition.
All right. We'll leave it there, theduran.locals.com, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODA.